The still of a London morning, a nation made secure. But at the 11th hour of this Remembrance Sunday, our thoughts will be with the men and women who in their hundreds of thousands gave their lives to make that security possible. And it's but a year since we stood on the brink of war. Last Remembrance Sunday, we watched the worsening situation in the Gulf. Today, the world knows the cost in lives that was paid for the Gulf War. This morning, the 43 British servicemen who died there are remembered, together with the 1.75 million from home and Commonwealth who died in the two world wars. Remembered too, the men and women who died in the service of their country in Malaya and Korea, in Suez and Aden, in the Falklands, and in that corner of the United Kingdom where peace is still held hostage by terror, in Northern Ireland, where 434 servicemen have died since 1969. Here at the Cenotaph, in country churches and by stone memorials on village greens, we're called as a nation and as individuals to remember the price of freedom. Those too young to remember the world wars at first hand, and who can perhaps be forgiven for wondering why remembrance matters at all, will find the answer in the desolation and cruelty and loneliness that fathers and grandfathers still recollect with a shudder. And though the numbers, year by year, slip away, there are still a few who remember the days of pride and glory in 1914, as men rushed to join the colours. But in France and Belgium, the glory turned to mud. The colours fluttered above a landscape of trench warfare. The patriotic songs were drowned by artillery barrage. The names of the battles imprinted themselves not only in the history books, but in the heart of nations. Gallipoli and Ypres, Verdun, the Somme, and Passchendaele. We remember too the wars at sea, the fate of countless men who sailed in merchant ships and battleships and submarines, whose grave is an ocean floor. In the Second World War, in 1941, 1,416 officers and ratings were lost when HMS Hood, the world's biggest battle cruiser, was blown up and sunk off Greenland by the German battleship Bismarck. Of the ship's complement, only 3 survived. We remember those who died during the landings in Italy and France, those who died during the Allied liberation of Europe, who died as the war was won. In North Africa and the Middle East, cemeteries in the desert, rank upon rank, remind us of the men who fell in battles such as Tobruk and El Alamein. The Royal Air Force too suffered fearsome loss. At their memorial at Runnymede are remembered many of the 73,045 pilots, bomber crews and ground staff who were killed or went missing in the war in Europe and against Japan. It's been called the Forgotten War. Until August 1945, men of the Commonwealth fought in the jungles of Burma and the Far East, fought and died either in battle or in the deprivation of captivity. War came home to our cities and ports during the Blitz. And again in 1944, when the flying bombs, the doodlebugs, were targeted on London. During those dark days, many members of the civilian services were killed. Air raid wardens and ambulance drivers, bomb disposal units and nurses and firemen. On this Remembrance Sunday, they are not forgotten. The bands, made up of the Irish, Welsh, Scots and Grenadier Guards, under their director of music, play Rule Britannia. To the west of the Cenotaph, representing the Navy, officers and ratings from Home Command and ships of the fleet, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, the Women's Royal Naval Service, Queen Alexandra's Royal Navy Nursing Service. The Merchant Navy, Coast Guards and fishing fleets. And from the Marines, officers and men from 40 Commando and the Royal Marines Reserves, City of London. An isle defended with such loss in so many engagements at sea. Away to the north of the Cenotaph, above the rooftops of Whitehall, Admiral Nelson guards the precious memory of British naval sacrifice. For centuries, the Navy has played a formidable role in the defense of country and once empire. In many of our home ports, memorials stand to remind us of the 51,000 men of the Royal Navy who died in the engagements of the Second World War. Over 1,500 ships were lost. "50 years ago, in 1941, the Navy suffered a series of devastating losses. Apart from the sinking of the Hood, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal was lost, and the battleship HMS Barham was torpedoed off the coast of Alexandria, with the loss of 868 lives. 3 days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, HMS Prince of Wales was attacked by a Japanese aircraft and sunk on the 10th of December off the coast of Malaya. Later the same day, the Repulse was sunk in the same waters. In those attacks, a further 840 names were added to the roll call of servicemen killed in action at sea. Today, the Prince of Wales and the Repulse, like so many other ships of the Royal Navy, lie on the ocean bed, declared protected wrecks and by Act of Parliament listed as war graves. The bands play oft in the stilly night. The long, sad catalogue of war turned its pages this year too. In February, the Gulf War came to an end. It was a televised war, brought home to us as it happened for 42 days and nights. It was said at the time that the cameras, the satellite communications, somehow made the whole thing unreal. But the tally of loss was real enough. As the pipers of the Scots Guards prepare to play the Lament for the Dead in War, we remember those days back at the turn of the year, and those who fell, the flowers of the forest. The sorrow of war just 9 brief months ago, and the lament for those who died in another war at Flodden Field 476 years ago. The massed bands now play Nimrod, the solemn, certain theme from Elgar's Enigma Variations. Elgar gives way to Purcell. When I am laid in earth, may my wrongs create no trouble in my breast. Over the years, so many families have had experience of that numbing day when they learned that a loved one had been killed or was simply missing, presumed dead. In addition to the 23,000 war cemeteries around the world, there are 200 memorials commemorating by name the 750,000 British and Commonwealth service men and women, either missing as a result of the two world wars or who lie in unidentified war graves. One such memorial, cared for by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, is at Brookwood Military Cemetery in Surrey. It bears the names of over 3,000 men and women who died in the Second World War. Among the long lists of names are some who died during the various raids on enemy-occupied territory in Europe. Names, too, of those who served as special agents, of some who died as prisoners and others killed while working with Allied underground movements. Wherever they died, their memory lives on in the tranquility of an English garden. On this English city thoroughfare in Whitehall, the complement of our national remembrance continues to gather. The procession of the clergy, the processional cross, leads the choir of the Chapel Royal. They're followed by the Sergeant of the Vestry, the Sub-Dean of the Chapel Royal, the Chaplain-in-Chief, the Bishop's Chaplain, and the Bishop of London. The Right Reverend and Right Honourable David Hope, enthroned in September this year. The bands play Supreme Sacrifice, written when the bitter memory of the Great War loomed large in 1918. The procession from Parliament, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, James Molyneux, Leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, Mr. Douglas Hurd, the Lord Chancellor, Lord Mackay of Clashburn, and Mr. Speaker, Bernard Wetherell. The procession of High Commissioners from 40 countries. Commissioners, followed by the service chiefs. The Chief of the Defence Staff, Field Marshal Sir Richard Vincent. Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Sir Julian Oswald. Chief of the General Staff, General Sir John Chappell. And Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Peter Harding. The hollow square of remembrance is almost complete, awaiting the arrival of Her Majesty the Queen and the royal princes. balcony of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, Princess Alice, Duchess of Gloucester, the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, the Princess Royal, the Princess of Wales. And from the door of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, walking out onto Whitehall, Her Majesty the Queen, His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, His Royal Highness the Duke of York, and His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent. The royal party, accompanied by their equerries, having taken their places, they await the chimes of Big Ben. buglers of the Royal Marines play the last post, as wherever we are this morning, we prepare to be part of this national act of remembrance led by Her Majesty the Queen. His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh handed his wreath by Lieutenant Commander Malcolm Sillars. Colonel John Winter hands the wreath to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. His Royal Highness the Duke of York receives his wreath from Captain Neil Blair. The Duke of Kent walks forward. His Royal Highness, President of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission.